Thank you, Enrique. It's a pleasure to be with everybody today. We live in difficult times, in times of a pandemic, which require all of us to be more of ourselves. We've got to be more authentic. We've got to be more transparent, more vulnerable. And one of the critical areas that we can do better in, especially if you're leading a team, is an area of decision making. Um, Unfortunately, science tells us that most of us are unaware on how our minds work and how we make decisions. But here we're here to show you simple tools and a decision-making playbook that you could use to make more effective decisions by yourself, within your teams, and in times of stress. Before we get started, we want this session to be highly interactive. So please check in with yourself and rate your level of stress on a scale of 1 to 10. Again, we know from the science of decision making that stress really influences the way we make decisions. So we want you to kind of assess your level of stress right now. Are you lowering level of stress? Are you a 1 or a 3, or you have moderate stress, or you're higher in stress level? And the second thing we want you to think about is a current or past situation that has challenged your decision-making ability. Again, we want this session to be highly practical for you. So think of an area, think of a situation which challenges your decision-making as you're listening to the content we're about to present to you. A little bit about ourselves. As Enrique mentioned, Ken and I have been working on empowering leaders and their teams to enhance their decision making for the last 10 years. And the crux of what we're really talking about, it's probably based on the largest research that was done on decision making. If you want to read more about it, it was published in Harvard Business Review, which really talks about how the best-in-class leaders go about making decisions. But the question that we're trying to answer today is, how can we become better at making decisions individually and in teams in times of a pandemic? What's really unique about the current paradigm that we live in is that it is impacting all of us. All leaders are being impacted equally. The situation that we face now, there's no precedence for us. That is, we cannot really rely on any best practices to draw from. And these are highly stressful times where us and the teams that we lead are highly anxious and at times frightened. What we know from the science of decision making, the work that Dr. Ken Brousseau and his colleagues, as well as Daniel Kahneman, Daniel Simon, and others have done, is that whenever we stress, we tend to think less analytically. We do not do well in thinking through problems and situations that require mental effort. And that pushes us to be highly action-oriented. We might find ourselves being impulsive. We might rely or over-rely on past experiences, past solutions that may not serve the current situation or the problem we're trying to solve for. Stress might promote tunnel vision. That is, we become so overly focused on the goals, the problem we're trying to solve, or it might limit our peripheral vision and limit us to see the big picture and the possibilities that may be in front of us. Stress and being decisive is not all bad. There may be at times that we've got to make a decision in an emergency or to be more productive. But what science of decision making tells us is that there may be situations like the one we're experiencing now, and if we become more action-oriented, we become more decisive, we become more prone to risks. We may fail to see the bigger picture, and then we may rely on past experiences and establish best practices that no longer serve us. And then when we need to be more creative and innovative, we may miss a lot of opportunities. All of that really was a foundation of what we're going to talk to you about in the next few minutes, that we do need a roadmap for decision making. And I'm now going to turn it over to my colleague, Ken, who's going to walk you through the science of decision making and the roadmap that we're talking about. Ken?
Thank you, Armin. Okay, so what Armin has just told us is that there are different modes of decision making and thinking, and those different modes fit with different kinds of circumstances. There's no one size that fits all situations. So what we're going to talk about is a roadmap for decision making. In this particular instance, we're going to put a big emphasis on the current situation, the pandemic, the crisis that we're all facing, but the roadmap is bigger than that. It will indicate to us when different kinds of situations arise and the kind of thinking, the kind of style. When we talk about different ways of thinking, the word we use is styles of thinking and deciding. So the roadmap is a big roadmap. It indicates the particular kind of style of thinking that will fit different kinds of situations. But in this particular presentation, we're going to focus heavily on the high stress circumstances we're facing right now and the big picture that we need to have in mind. So individuals, team leaders, people in general have different styles of thinking. We vary widely in our styles of thinking. So some of us thrive in particular situations that call for very quick, fast, focused action. Generally speaking, those are relatively simple situations, don't have a lot of parts to take into effect. There's a short fuse burning. We need to act quickly. However, some of us have styles that are better suited to more complex decision situations that require some rather deep and wide thinking and exploration. Now, none of us are locked into any one style. We all have different styles of decision making, but there may be one or two styles that we tend to favor and use more widely. So what we're going to talk about now is means of adapting to the different situations that arise. It's easy for us to talk about shifting your style, adapting your style, but I want you to know that when we say style, we're talking about some deep-seated habits. Most of us don't think about the particular mode we're in at any particular time. In fact, on the research we've done with hundreds of thousands of people around the world, we know that people have an incomplete picture of their own styles of thinking. So consequently, few people are very adept at shifting their style to deal with particular circumstances and situations that arise. Usually each of us has kind of a sweet spot of decision making where our particular style is going to fit very well with the circumstance at hand, but likewise, there'll be other situations where our particular style isn't going to work so well. This is a picture of part of the roadmap where we describe different styles, and we put our emphasis on 4 particular styles of thinking and decision making. So in this 2x2 table you see here, on the horizontal axis, left to right, there's 2 styles on the left side, the ones we have labeled decisive and flexible. They're action-oriented styles. They're fast-thinking styles. When a decision needs to be made and you're in one or the other of these 2 modes, you grab some quick facts and quickly arrive at a decision. However, the 2 styles on the right, the hierarchic and integrative styles, are what we call maximizing styles. And what that means is when you're in one of those modes, you're going to want to maximize your intake of information before you're going to be ready to pull the trigger and make a decision. On the vertical axis, on the top row, we have what we call unifocus styles, decisive and hierarchic. And all that means is when you're in one of those modes of thinking, chances are you're going to have a very particular goal or objective in mind that you'll want to achieve. And once you find such a path to achieve that particular goal or objective, you're going to stick with it. You'll stay the path, so to speak. However, when you're in one of the 2 styles on the bottom rung, flexible, integrative, they're what we call multi-focus styles, and the chances are then you don't have just one style, one objective in mind, one goal in mind. You have multiple goals and objectives and outcomes that you like to achieve. So there won't be any one path to achieve those multiple goals and objectives. In fact, your objectives and your paths and your strategies when you're in those styles, that can all shift and change over time. So those two styles are much more variable. Each of the styles, as I've mentioned before, has its sweet spot and maybe sort of a sour spot. And you get the sweet spot when your style fits the situation in hand. You get the sour spot when it doesn't fit the situation. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this here, but you can see that decisive style, its strengths are that it's fast, consistent, reliable, orderly. If you're in the decisive mode, you do what you set out to do. However, if you're in, say, the flexible style, you'll make decisions quickly, but you may shift your mind in your strategy just as quickly, very quick. The two styles on the right kind of are more analytic, a little bit slower to make a decision, but that hierarchic style, when you're in that mode and you come up with a strategy to achieve a particular objective, you're going to stick with it. You'll have a lot of good reasons for doing that. Very logical, very orderly. The integrative style, when you're in that mode, you're going to have a lot of objectives in mind, and you'll see a bigger picture in how things interrelate, and you may have a number of different strategies in the back of your head for achieving those multiple goals and objectives. Okay, so here's a little test for you, just to get a sense of what we're talking about. What we'd like you to do right now is think about how you go about making decisions. Think of a recent decision you've made that's a rather important one. So the question is, what do you prefer? Do you prefer just to quickly take action and get a lot of things done? Do you hear the tick of the clock? Do you feel time ticking loudly? Or, on the other hand, do you prefer to take time to think things through, mull things over, take into account different sources of information before you're ready to make a decision? So think about those two contrasts. On the other hand, when you come to a conclusion, which are you more likely to do? Stick with the tried and true, the familiar, the time-tested solutions, or are you more inclined to experiment, try out different approaches, and maybe shift your strategy and tactics over time? Those are the two key issues that underlie the style model. So the recommendation we have here goes back to that old adage, know thyself. If you know yourself, if you know your own styles, you know your inclinations, you're going to be clear about where your real strengths and weaknesses lie. You'll know what circumstances and situations are going to fit you well, and you'll know those that are going to be kind of a challenge for you, where you need to step out of your comfort zone. In addition to knowing yourself well, we prescribe knowing other people well too, and we use this model and this roadmap when we deal with teams, as Armin was suggesting. So if you know your own style and you know the styles of your colleagues and coworkers, you'll have some insights into how to stay on the same page with them, how to vary your style according to the people you're dealing with. And again, you'll know when it's an important thing to stay with what you're comfortable with as opposed to stepping out of your comfort zone and trying something new. I'm going to turn it back over to Armin here, who will talk a little bit about how we use this in the context of working with leaders and their teams.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. So in times of crisis, in times where you're leading a team, you want to kind of optimize your chances of getting a team buy-in. And here we have 4 recommendations for you on how you can best enhance decision-making in your team. One is use maximizer. Those are the type that Ken was talking about. Those are the people who enjoy dealing and analyzing a lot of information. Engage them early on in the decision-making process. Second, we've noticed that especially in leaders managing virtual teams, they tend to be more micromanaging. They tend to be more directive. So give up some of that authority, kind of account for that as you become more conscious of your decision-making style. Thirdly, manage your pace, manage the speed of decision-making with quality. Know what type of information you know and you need and when you need them. Your team members may feel helpless, and again, giving them a sense of control and autonomy by creating more options is a wonderful tactic that you can use. The distinction that we want you to make here is, as you're leading yourself and leading your teams in making effective decision, is the distinction between simple situations where you need to be more decisive, and then complex situation where you need to be more analytical and multi-focused, right? So you've got to consider those when you're leading yourself and leading a team. As Ken was talking about, the style of thinking that does best in times of crisis, the times that we're living now, is the integrative style of thinking. How you can enhance and increase the condition that gives rise to integrative thinking style is you've got to remove yourself as much as possible from stress and pressure, create some thinking space and time for yourself, and let others know to give you that thinking time and space. As it relates to making decisions with your team, meet with people who you think are maximizers. They're analytical, and they like to be resourceful and creative. Forget about time. Give yourself ample time to make decisions. Make even break your decision making timeline. Break it into different phases. When you're working virtually, if you're using digital collaborative platforms, make sure you jot down notes and you build on other people's ideas. What Ken and I are really passionate about is to helping all of you guys become better decision making and to make the choices that would empower you and your teams. What we really encourage you to do here is to follow these simple practices. I want to kind of highlight a couple of them. One is to understand the ebbs and flows of your decision making and understand how your mind works when it comes to making decisions. It does require practice, but what Ken and I have been doing ourselves for the last many years is you've got to become student of your own decision making, as well as become very astute in reading other people and how they make decisions. We have some wonderful resources that are making available to you thanks to Enrique. We have a complimentary assessment that you can take right after this call to learn more about your decision making and thinking making style. And we invite you and your team to take advantage of this offer. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at the email on the screen.
I'd like to just add a couple of thoughts here to emphasize some of the key points here. One is that if we didn't say this explicitly, I'd like to say it now. Stress and pressure, like we're under right now in this pandemic situation, that tends to push us toward these action-oriented styles, particularly that decisive style where we take quick action. And that can happen even, in fact, when we're facing a very complex situation that calls for deeper thinking, maybe that integrative style we talked about. So that's why we're saying, get away from the stress and pressure. If you have to make a big, complex decision and get into that more analytic frame of mind, you've got to remove yourself from the circumstances that are creating the pressure for you, or you simply won't be able to do it. It's not humanly possible to think analytically when you're under a great deal of stress and pressure. Anyway, that's the key takeaway I hope you've gotten from our presentation here.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Armin.
Awesome.
Enrique.
I'm not Zoom bombing. I'm hoping that I'm just joining to bring some of the questions that the audience is asking. And so we are going through, like you said before, Ken, a lot of change right now. And things are, very stressful for a lot of people. So what's the best way to go about making decisions right now, knowing that so many things are uncertain going forward? Because very often it seems that people when they are going to get into the process of making a decision, they think that whatever they are deciding becomes a set of a stone kind of thing, right? It's the new truth. But we are seeing right now that everything is changing basically every week. So what's your message to those leaders, especially leaders who have to make decisions, but knowing that part of the process is the flexibility they need to change things going forward?
Okay. Now, Armin, let me take a shot at answering that. Very good question, as a matter of fact. When things are changing fast, there's a lot of uncertainty as we're facing right now. The key thing is to stay limber. Have a number of different strategies in mind. Don't get overcommitted to any one strategy or tactic. Have the options in mind. That's number one. Then number two is look at the situation you're immediately facing on which you need to make a decision. Is it a big, complex decision with a lot of consequences that are going to last? I'll give you an example. Recently, just when things started closing down with the pandemic, here in the state of California, the schools were closed suddenly, bang, just like that, they were closed. What the people who made that decision overlooked, because they didn't do what we were talking about, is the fact that many school kids get their one nutritious meal of the day at school. And consequently, they went without food until people said, oops, we made an error. So now the schools are again making lunches and meals for others. But it took some time, and during that period of time, some of those kids went without eating. So that's what we mean by backing up, looking at the big picture, getting away from stress and pressure. Don't get too decisive.
That is fantastic. And that makes me think about the fact that especially in times of uncertainty, of deep uncertainty like we're going through right now, when those decisions rely only on the hands of the leaders, that can create a problem in the long term, because they not because they purposefully or intentionally are doing it in that way, but they may be missing a lot of information coming from all areas in the organization. Like you're saying, Ken, maybe one of their leaders was thinking like, we're going to make this decision and close down schools, but they didn't really think about this, not because they intentionally said, we don't want to give food to our kids. Maybe they just didn't even think about that. So in the decision-making styles and in the decision-making process, what's your recommendation for leaders to include those that may not have the power to make those decisions, and yet they have the inputs that are needed for those decisions to be effective?
Well, the strategy is to go out of your way to get those other inputs. You can bring other people into the picture. You don't have to turn over the decision to them, but you can consult with others. You can say, here's what we're thinking about doing. What do you think? Are we missing anything? It doesn't cost much to do that. Yeah. And it can make a very big difference, particularly if you're facing an unusual circumstance where there can be multiple outcomes.
Absolutely. Armin, I think you were going to add something.
Yeah, I think we need to realize that leaders kind of behave in two different ways. Either they withhold or they delay making decisions. So a lot of time we see that leaders get stalled and people get frustrated because their leaders are not making any decisions. We've seen that during this crisis as well, where we get frustrated by that, or we get leaders who are making decisions without kind of this exploratory decision style that we're talking about, that makes us more creative and resourceful. And I think the only reason the only solution is kind of becoming more mindful of our own decision making, kind of realizing our dark tendencies when it comes to decision making, and understand the psychology of it, because we all prone to it, even the best of us.
Absolutely.
That's powerful, and actually very related to what I wanted to ask you next. One of the things that it's becoming more evident these days is the need to connect dots that are seemingly unconnected or disconnected, right, in the reality. For example, the one question that I wanted to ask you is the link between empathy and decision making. Because right now, like for example, in our country, we're going through this dilemma, which should not be a dilemma. Unfortunately, some people have made it that way. We're going through the dilemma of either opening the economy or sacrificing people's health. That should not be a dilemma, and yet here we are. But the same applies for many other things. You know, you have to make some decisions, but what's the role that empathy is playing in the decision-making process during this crisis?
Okay, well, very simply, if the decision is going to have an impact on people, then even if it's not your particular tendency to think a lot about the people and how they're going to be affected by the decision, then a wise leader goes out of his or her way to bring other people who are in tune with how other people feel in their circumstances and get their input before closing down on a decision. You have to go out of the way. That means you can maybe back up a couple of paces. If you're just hell-bent on going forward fast as you can, you're likely not to connect the important dots.
I love that, and one thing that I always say, you know, not for my entire life, but at least over the past 2 or 3 years, one thing that I've been saying is that one of the most important roles of the leader today is to have the ability to see the invisible, meaning to see things that may be, you know, obscure or dark for other leaders, but they can see it. They can see the effects of that one thing and make decisions accordingly. And like you're saying, Ken, sometimes leaders do not need to be the ones seeing the invisible, but they need to bring the people who can see those things and, you know, bring them on board as an input for the decision-making process. So I think this is fascinating. You know, what you're saying, it is, you know, whether you truly believe in making decisions that could impact positively people. I mean, if you can't do that, you still need to bring people on board that can help you see that. So, you know, one last question that I wanted to ask you is, I know there's no playbook for these things, and it would be it would be oversimplifying to try to give people a playbook to go by this crisis. But if there were 2 or 3 things that you want people to start doing right now when it comes to their decision-making processes during this time of coronavirus, what those things would be?
Well, one is, as Armin and I have been suggesting, is know your own style. And even if you don't do the style assessment, but you'll get an opportunity to do the style assessment. So think about that. Think about what your style is. It's not a matter of good style or bad style. Just what is your particular style? Know that. Secondly, when you're about to make a decision, a particularly important decision, think about what that decision situation looks like. Is it big? Is it complex? Is it unfamiliar? If it's big and complex and unfamiliar, then you need to maybe go out of your way to get these other sources of information. There may be, unknown unknowns. You don't know what all the questions are. So get other people involved. They may have a better idea than you do of what some of those unknown unknowns are.
Yeah, just to add to that, this is an exercise, as you said, Enrique, empathy, also the exercise of intellectual humility and open-mindedness, and not really dismissing any information because we think it's invalid. So it's an exercise of the mind as well as the heart.
Love it, and I love it. One of the things that we have been talking about in our sessions is that because we don't know, not only do we, have there's uncertainty going on and we don't know what we don't know, but as we discover new things, they are new for everybody because none of us have been in anything like this in our lifetimes, and so a lot of these things are new for mostly everybody right now. And this is a time to put on the table all the ideas, no matter how sometimes crazy they may sound and how in normal circumstances those ideas may have been, discarded for what they were. Now is the moment, like you're saying, Armin, to have some intellectual, mental, emotional flexibility and humility, and just allow people to bring those ideas, because in one of them, we will find the answer to some of the challenges or the ordeals that we may be going through as an organization. So, so that's fantastic. Any closing thought, Ken, Armin?
Just to remember and bear it in mind. Know thyself. In this case, what we're saying, know your own style, and then actively use that information in dealing with different situations and other people as well.
Yeah, my advice would be to build your confidence and courage, and you can do that by becoming aware of your decision-making style. And that's what people need from you, is just courage and your ability to step up.